Yes, we have several notes. We have three.
Three. One is
Test.
old-fashioned. Is taking handwriting.
No, I think I managed to nudge him enough to go to
Test.
So,
Test.
open a Etherpad just in case
From wiki page.
from NetConf status page.
Check. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
So we don't have a screen in front.
Where is Etherpad here? I don't know.
Go to minutes
1, 2, 1, 2.
and Etherpad 95.
I can write also something.
Yeah, you can.
It's time.
Yep, it is time. This is the NetConf working group. If you were here for some other working group, this would be a good time to exit.
Sue is not here. Sue was the dedicated JavaScript.
Right.
So the dedicated JavaScript is not here yet. Is anybody having the Jabber running and can read the questions from Jabber room on the microphone?
Yes. Do you have JavaScript? Yes.
Yeah, the minutes are taken on Etherpad, so everybody can write there. But we have some official note takers who should write more than the others. But we need a JavaScript. I don't hear you well.
Oh, okay.
Okay, if Mikhail, you can do Jabber, this is fine. Sue was volunteering, but she's not here yet. Okay, let's start. This is the NetConf status slides. Do you want to present?
All right, so we have minute takers in JavaScript. Here is the note wealth. If you're not familiar, anything you say or speak to is considered part of IETF.
This is refreshed every time from the working group chair page. Please take care of all RFC numbers written down here. If you are not familiar, look at them shortly once you have more time. But the noteware is indeed very important for us.
All right, here are the list of chartered items for the NetConf working group, and it's also on the agenda page. I'm not going to read through all of them. And here's a list of non-chartered items that we'll also discuss. All right, status. We have RESTconf, Yang patch, and Yang library that have already gone through working group last call. RESTconf has a few items that need to be addressed on the mailing list, hopefully. Yang patch and Yang library publication process has already started, and they are currently in the 80 queue for review. Server model. On the GitHub, there are two open issues. The keychain model within the server model got some good reviews, especially from the sec people. There will be some discussion around proposal to see if it makes sense to split the draft, and Kent will talk to that. Zero Touch again has 1 open and 2 in review and on GitHub. And RESTconf collection, unfortunately, did not make much progress between the last 2 meetings. Yang push, is started as a group item. And RESTconf Yang push which will be presented in this meeting. The draft organization with respect to both NetConf and RESTConf push will be discussed, and whether it makes sense to have 2 or 3 or whatever number of drafts. 5277 biz, some folks decided to take up the, trying to update 5277 biz. The chairs have enrolled the previous authors to see if they would like to continue to be in the discussion. They have contributed. So both the current set of authors and the original authors will work together on 5277. Finally, any open items?
Yeah, let's proceed immediately.
All right, the first presentation is from Andy. I think he will give a quick update on the 3 drafts that are in various stages of completion.
I didn't do any slides because I don't have a lot of status and we have a lot of new interesting work we'd rather get to. RESTConf, there was a review from Tom Petch that we just need to update the draft and put in a few editorial changes, and I didn't see anything major there. Yang Library, there was a security directorate request to make a change. I made that change and I sent it to Benoit and the ISG. I think it'll be okay. And I don't think there's anything on Yang patch that required more changes. So by the end of next week, everything will be updated, and hopefully all 3 would be in Benoit's plate by then. Okay.
Yeah, first I need it on my plate to be able to prepare the write-up. So you are going to address everything which has been raised after the last draft? So are you going to address everything, or is there any controversial thing you object to address?
No, I didn't see anything. Tom has done like at least 2 thorough reviews, and so this follow-up is just some nits, I think. But if there's anything in there, I'll bring it up on the mailing list.
So once I see the new draft, I will provide immediately a write-up to Benoit.
Okay.
All right. The next presentation is by Eric. He will talk to the NetConf Yang push.
All right, I'm talking on behalf of Alex, Alberto, Ambika, and Enar, and myself. Alex is the first author. We joined in and helped out after that. I'm going to give you an update on what's been going on in the last few months. Since IETF 94, we've had 2 updates. We had a couple changes which are worth highlighting, and the majority of the draft has stayed the same. But as you heard a minute ago, we're going to be doing some questions over, does the structure remain like this over time? First issue is we used an established subscription instead of a create subscription. And that's used for negotiated subscriptions versus unnegotiated subscriptions, which is what is being used. I don't think that's me.
It's easy to say.
It is me. I'm gonna talk from a different mic then. Anybody have a problem with this? All right, so I'm going to stand up here and we'll see what happens. So the difference is that as we started looking at 5277, it used create subscription as an RPC that's not negotiated. We wanted to separate the 2, so that was a change in the RPC. Next up is we updated the definitions in the RPCs for modify, delete, and establish subscriptions. We added push source configuration for static subscriptions, so you know where the source is that you're trying to send the information. If you're sending a static info, you got to know where you're going to send it to for static subscriptions. We incorporated a lot of the content from the RESTConf HTTP2 draft. We took the QoS stuff out of there. At the request of the working group, you guys wanted to consolidate a lot of the material so that there was a single place for subscriptions. So a lot of the state machine, a lot of the information that talked about how to prioritize quality of service came into this draft. We brought in a couple capabilities from OpenConfig telemetry. Specifically, they had two items that we thought were useful, and those were the support of both multiple static receivers as well as using DSCP for signaling through for telling how important a packet was through the network. And the last thing is we made just random updates to make the text better. Now, stepping back for a second, I'm going to talk about the vision that kind of brings these three drafts together that I'm going to be talking about. First of all, as you guys pointed out, 5277 is not something to ignore. And there really is a mental difference to think about notifications, which are something that the programmer thinks you need to hear about. So it's really a push of everything that they think you care about versus a Yang push, which is a data store where you are fetching the items you think you're interested with. So we had a vision of combining a single subscription mechanism for both services, for both things the programmer thinks you need, as well as things you're trying to fetch. And so underneath, we've tried to center around that single subscription model idea. Beyond that, we wanted to be really robust and flexible. There's a lot of things people need for subscriptions, from different filter types to being able to push on change or periodic. I'm not going to go through all the requirements. ITORS defined the requirements before. So those are the requirements that are needed for extensibility. And of course, we want to make sure, and we'll talk about this later, that we don't have to adopt all technology at once. We want to make sure that if we decide to choose something, we can adopt it on its own merits and let it, if it doesn't need to be adopted yet, go bit by bit. So that's the vision. Now here's a slide which is, believe it or not, simplified from the earlier versions. On behalf of the chairs, they helped me simplify the idea here. But basically, it's a table which shows the difference between the three drafts I'm going to be talking about today. The biz draft on the left, the Yang push draft, which is on the right, and that's what we're highlighting. And on the bottom, there's some stuff with different transports. What's important here is it shows some of the things that are really important that are above and beyond what's in 5277. The ability to support many subscriptions per transport session. The ability to support static subscriptions. The ability to actually modify a subscription that's in flight. A lot of people using NetConf subscriptions today actually have to create two sessions in order to get the same stuff across so they don't drop something when they're modifying it. There's a number of inefficiencies in the current subscription mechanisms that we really wanted to address. And so we looked and thought that a common control plane, a common signaling plane for subscriptions in both environments was useful. And this is really just a cheat sheet for trying to see what the difference is between the two. One thing that's good, and I'll mention when we get to the biz draft, is that we make sure there's a course of mode that's backwards compatible. Now, with the help of Wahid and others, Ambika especially, we had a demo at the hackathon. I'm going to be showing that demo tonight. I did get it completely working, so it's going to be fun to see. But basically, we add, create subscriptions and delete subscriptions for operational data, config data, on change, and periodic push from Open Daylight. So if anybody wants to actually get their hands on and watch the draft Yang push work with real Open Daylight and a real router, come up and check that out tonight. Now, quick review of things that are in the draft and that have changed and are worth highlighting. Streams and filters. Filters reduce what you're trying to see. Streams actually reduce what you're trying to see too. Do you just want to see the operational or configuration information from a certain Yang model? This is part of what we're doing. We added, as we mentioned, the ability to do static configurations, and there's an option for static configurations now in the model. In the model, it's in addition on the bottom, and I can talk about this as much as you want. We have the ability to identify a particular receiver, as well as the addition of prioritization information at the bottom. For monitoring the subscription, there's the same things that you have to monitor that we added. with the addition of being able to see if a subscription was configured or not, because obviously you're not going to use an RPC to do a configured subscription. Additional stuff, we updated the RPCs so that we have better error codes and better error responses if the subscription didn't go through correctly, and we have the ability to understand if there was a failure in a modify. So if your modify subscription failure existed, you can provide the reason and maybe some suggestions on how to make your modify work. And not shown is the other RPCs there, but they're all in the draft. So next steps. At this point, we think we have a fairly decent proposal and a working set of code for what Yang push should look like. The real question is, do we want to go from the self-sufficient model, which is the netconf notification, the netconf transport as well as the Yang push, or do we want to do some separation of the interests? And we'll have that discussion, I think, at the end of the overall session. And there's been discussions for other transports above and beyond netconf. There are people who've talked about RESTconf, there's talk about HTTP2, and we even just got a discussion with some people from another standards forum about possibly using IPFix as a transport. So the importance of having transport options under a general subscription mechanism seems to be relevant. And at the end, we're going to try to talk about the right division. Authors will take whatever division that the group directs. Our opinion right now is it's probably best to split the subscription from the transport, and that will make life easier as we choose new transports to add in underneath. And I think that's it for the slides here. Questions? Do you want to turn it around? Or
You can come back and
Ken Watson, Juniper Networks. So I do support the idea of breaking up the control from the transports. I think we learned in netmod and netconf with netmod sort of also simultaneously defining the XML encoding, and now we're trying to separate the XML encoding from JSON encoding, factor it out. I just feel like this is sort of setting us up for the same kind of issue if we don't address it now. So I do recommend splitting out the control in the transports.
I mean, we can close that particular part of the discussion if people want to see if there's anybody who's opposed to it, because I don't know anybody I've talked to who's opposed.
Yeah, does anyone oppose the way we split the transport from, I guess not, okay. Does anyone, sorry, I saw a hand, okay. Does anyone oppose, so show of hands if anyone opposes the suggestion of splitting the transport. No? All right. Support? All right. The room seems to generally agree that we should do the split.
Second thing, in this description.
One second. I mean, making the split, having the transport separated does not mean that everybody agrees with two drafts as a whole. I mean, whether we want to have 3 drafts at the end or 2 drafts, one being the transport, one collecting everything else, this is still a decision we need to take.
We can have a discussion at the end after we talk about the other transports, about how many, but at least we know that people want transport in attendance.
So when do you think this should be?
After the next presentation. The RESTconf is another transport discussion, so that's the time to have
Still
it.
today.
Yeah, as of right now, it'd just be 2 drafts, but if we
Right.
took on RESTconf, that'd become a 3rd draft. Yeah. Okay, second thing?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Second thing, in the subscription mechanism, you have currently the ability to describe, for periodic results or on change. What I'd really like to see also would be an ability to receive a notification when a value has exceeded some standard deviation of, within a window of time. So you can imagine a curve, and if you're tracking that curve with a band of say plus or minus 5%, and it's not really interesting to notify the controller if it stays within that band, but as soon as it exceeds that band, then you would want to alert the controller to that. So something along those lines would be excellent.
Yeah, and that's an awesome point. Right now we have 2 filters. There are 3 filters if you include 5277, but there's XPath and there's subtree based on 6241. And they don't have that kind of capability. We saw all the possibility in filters and we got scared. We're like, oh my God, you can use it on anything. You can do any filter you want. So instead of adding every possible filter, we started with what was defined. And we said, if we can get more into the base draft, great. If we can't, there's always the augmentations. I love these filters. They really can do some cool stuff. I don't know how much should be in the base draft, how much should be augmented, but it's definitely worth the discussion.
Rick Taylor, Airbus. Just directly following on from that statement, I'm not sure if you're familiar with some of the work we've just started kicking off in DTN. We're working on an asynchronous management protocol. You know, when you're working in a disrupted network, you can't have subscription-based stuff. Your latencies are far too long. But we're playing around, well, I say playing around, we're trying to formalize some proper ideas about inserting the triggers into an autonomous system so that it will then start reporting when these triggering conditions start to apply. Can I request that you go and have a look at some of the stuff we're working on there and see whether there's some crossover of ideas, just to make sure that we don't try and implement the same thing in two completely different ways. And likewise, we'd love some feedback from what you're doing with this so that we can be more yang.
I would love that. We do have one mechanism to start with, and that is the prioritization that matches the HTTP2 priorities.
Yeah.
You can have one priority that's higher than another, and in that case, it will dequeue before the other. So if there's an outage and you have all this stuff batched up, you will have dequeuing for any particular destination based on the relative priority of the subscription.
Okay, so I think we're sort of meeting in the middle as we come from two completely different endpoints. And it'd be interesting to see where the line is drawn or whether we do cross over on what we're doing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So,
that'd be great.
Thanks.
Other questions? All right, thanks.
So folks, as you approach the mic, I'm sure you know your name very well, but most other people don't. So state your name as clearly as possible. Pause before you start your questioning. Thank you.
This is especially important for remote attendees. They don't know who you are. Yeah, go ahead. If you please can speak more closely to the microphone.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kent. This is the server model update. Just a quick recap. The keychain module was presented at SAG 94 and to solicit expert reviews and opinions. Sean Turner, who was previously the security AD, agreed to review it, and he did provide me a verbal review, which is why you didn't see it posted to the mailing list over a course of a very long phone call. And then the updates made to the 09 draft were primarily to address his concerns. I'm not going to go through all the updates and details in the interest of time. There are a number of open issues still, though, and we're going to discuss these one at a time. Actually, hold on just a second. There's 6 of them, so just keep track of that. The first is missing feature statements. Currently, the keychain module is missing many feature statements, I think, especially around algorithms and action statements. It seems obvious that not all devices will support all algorithms, or the ability to load a private key or to generate a private key, or even to generate a certificate signing request. So it seems that we need to add some feature statements. I'm aware of this. I don't really think this is a discussion point per se right now, but just be aware that an update will be coming to address that point. The second item, the key usage in the generate private key action. Current text says you see the key usage is an enumeration, it's assigning or encryption, and then there's this comment says it's unclear if these should be somehow more specific or varied. I mean, it was the discussion I was having with Sean, and he threw it out there, and I looked it up in terms of what this TLS does, and that's how I extracted this, but I'm not really clear myself if what we should do here. I assume I need to go back to Sean and ask him for his recommendation, but if anyone in the room has thoughts about it, I'd be interested in hearing them. Okay, didn't think so. So I'll take it to the mailing list. Number 3, factor out common data within NetConf and RESTConf modules. Okay, so The current NetConf server and RESTconf server modules both have a number of uses statements in them that results in the same configuration needing to be entered more than once. So on screen, you just see me doing a grep on the NetConf module, but the same is true within the RESTconf module. And you can see that for instance, the SSH server grouping, whether it's listening or non-listening, I mean, the only difference is the listening includes also address and port, but otherwise the bulk of the data is the same. Also, for instance, the cert maps and other parts, they're actually the same data. So at the bottom bullet point here, consider a server that supports both NetConf TLS and NetConf call home TLS. Certain things like the list of the trusted CA certs, the list of the trusted client certificates, and the certificate maps would all need to be specified twice. The example in the document shows this is the case. It's not nearly as bad as before. Remember, what drove us towards creating the keychain-based approach in the first place was duplicate data entering. So it's not nearly as bad as before, but there's still something. And so it's, I don't know if anyone else noticed this. They think it's an issue. Okay, I'll take it to the list. Number 4, how to complete the SSH and TLS server modules, or how complete do they need to be? The current draft defines a minimum subset of SSH and TLS server configuration. It does not support many of the config knobs provided by various SSH and TLS server implementations. The issue seems similar to a module that needs to be supported by many vendors. Do we choose the lowest common denominator and expect augmentations to fill in the missing parts over time? Or should we make an effort to fill in more and use feature statements to disable or enable the unsupported parts? Any thoughts on this?
Jeff, as a lot of the security people are going to probably want those things to be on as features at the very least. I'm assuming you're talking about things like which specific certificates, styles you can choose, which specific protocols, et cetera. Like you may want to enable some Cypher suites optionally that may not be supported globally, as an example.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay.
William Lupton here from Broadband Forum. I'd know the answer if I'd actually read the draft, so apologies for this. But so we're saying that within this NetConf or RESTconf specific module, there's these SSH or TLS server config, as opposed to there being an SSH server config module or a TLS server config module, or are these separate modules?
So the draft currently has there's an SSH server module which defines a grouping.
Oh, okay.
And separately, there's a TLS server module that defines a grouping.
Okay, sorry, you've answered my question.
And then those groupings are used by the NetConf server module.
Okay, so they are broken out into separate modules. Yeah.
Martin Björklund says on Jabber that he wants to keep it at a minimum.
At a minimum. Okay, great. Thank you. Excellent. And I'll confirm that on the mailing list as well. Number 5. So the question is if we should split this draft into many drafts. This draft defines a number of modules that might be used in other future drafts. Already the IETF syslog module was thinking to reference the keychain module in order to define something like an IETF TLS client module. To me, it seems odd that such future drafts would have to reference an RFC called the NetConf server and RESTconf server configuration models draft. So the proposal or the question, I guess, to the working group is if we should split these drafts. And there are a couple proposals on the screen. Well, I guess the proposal number 0 is to do nothing, leave it as it is. Proposal number 1 is to split it into some number of granular drafts. You can see them on the screen, and the ones that are grayed out are effectively things that we would not have to do immediately, right? They're the client modules. I'm not personally interested in working on them, but perhaps Clyde Wilds, who's pushing for the syslog module, would be interested in picking up the TLS client module. Proposal number 2 is similar to the left proposal 1, except that then it blends the client and the server together into a single draft, so you could get something like the second one down, NetConf SSH client server. Of course, if we do that approach, then it kind of locks us into having to define both the client and the server, and this is what I'm trying to avoid with proposal number 1. But I'll leave it to the group to decide.
Mehmet Ersu, I would like to suggest proposal 2. I don't see a value in it if we have too many drafts for single pieces.
So if we went with proposal 2, would we then also define the client half?
Say it again.
If with proposal number 2, so okay, so proposal number 1 would be immediately there'd only be 4 drafts. So both 1 and 2 are immediately just 4 drafts, but proposal number 1 allows 3 more drafts to be standardized sometime in the future. But if we do proposal number 2, it means that we would have to define the client part of it as well now, which would delay how long it would take to finalize these drafts.
So actually, I add one more comment. Before we count the number of proposals, there are a couple of more suggestions we want to probably take into consideration of how else to deal with the keychain model. So maybe can we put all the proposals on the table before we try to vote on them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Any comments specific to any other proposals for how to deal with the keychain model? Okay. One that I have heard about that Kent and I talked a little bit about is, of course, there's a routing keychain model, which for reasons of security might also need pretty much comes in, needs the same requirements that you have from a server configuration perspective. So that's one that we might want to think about. The other is, there was some discussion in CIDR, I believe, on a keychain model that they would need. So the question is there a generic need for a keychain model across working groups?
Regarding the routing keychain module, I have been working closely with AC, and we spoke again after you and I discussed earlier this week. We again believe that the routing keychain module is actually fundamentally different than the system keychain module that we're trying to define within this working group. I'm actually myself have not, I don't have familiarity with the CIDR keychain proposal, so that's a new one for me.
Okay. The only thing that came out of that discussion, I know you had with AC, was that from a security perspective, AC is counting on NetConf security to do the key exchange or setting up the keys, but that might not pass the SEC review. That's what I've been told. So that's why a generic keychain model like the one you have with asymmetric keys being used to set up the key table might be necessary.
Okay, so so in AC's proposal, it's basically distributing pre-shared keys to the various router systems, and how those keys would be distributed to those systems would presumably be through management control plane protocols such as NetConf or RESTConf, and those are secured protocols. The main thing to consider would be that the strength of the security connection cannot be less than the strength of the key that you're distributing within the connection, but that's a known issue already. So they're related but different.
Mehmet Ersu, I would like to understand better as co-chair, I mean, what are we defining as action item or work item for NetConf working group? Is it something, a universal approach satisfying all needs of the security area, or is it something what we need in NetConf working group? I would like to prefer the latter, to publish as soon as possible. We don't have time to prepare a universal mechanism.
Agreed. And as it is currently defined, it is the minimum what we need. It could be extended in the future. Someone could do a biz to add more if you like.
I mean, if security area is reviewing the approach we define in NetConf workgroup, they need to review it under the constraints we have developed.
Sure. I mean, and Sean's review was overwhelmingly positive about the approach that we're taking. He thought that we should just finish it up and let it go to the security people for final review.
So if there is any objection to this proposal, I would like to hear now, immediately. Otherwise, the recommendation is to prepare something which is needed in NetConf instead of working on a universal mechanism.
Agreed.
Rick, beg your pardon, Rick Taylor. It's just a simple comment between the differences between proposal 1 and proposal 2. I can totally understand why proposal 1 appeals. You just work on the server side here. You push the client work out to a later date. I just get the feeling that if the client of SSH, TLS, whichever, is being defined in a different working group, you're going to end up actually making more work. I can't see how you define the server side without mentioning the client side, even if it's informally in the work you're doing. So I would suggest that proposal 2 seems to be the cleaner way of doing it. Okay.
And the other thing to consider, I mean, typically we don't think about configuration models for clients, right? We're only worried about the server, but syslog is a special thing, because syslog is, when you're pushing syslog, the device is actually the client. It's the syslog client. So that's why they would need to have a TLS client protocol.
Yeah.
Under what use cases would we need to have an SSH client? I mean, do boxes initiate SSH connections, outbound SSH connections? Do boxes initiate outbound NetConf connections? Do boxes initiate outbound RESTConf connections? These are the questions. If it's true, then this is why we'd very much want to have, I think, proposal number 2.
Looks like Jeff has the answer.
Okay.
Jeff, I was going to say 2 things, but the third one would be, yes, expect the boxes to make outbound connections. We're going to see, you see that thing in real life to start with. If you're Unix sysadmin, this just happens. My first point was going to be that as far as routing and the sort of generic NetConf keychain requirements, there's overlap in some of the concepts, but the actual configuration semantics, I think, are mostly disjoint. So I would not stress over that too much. The thing I would sort of recommend, and this is probably what the security guys would recommend anyway, is just make sure that your terminology is consistent across the different things, so that thing A means thing A in both models. My second thing is that there is no requirements from CIDR specifically for any sort of keychaining type things. The security thingies that are passed around in CIDR for RPKI are completely alien to all this stuff.
Martin Björklund said on Jabber, I would also support number 2. I think the client parts would be useful. I realize it might take time, but it would at least be useful to look at it.
Okay. So I heard overwhelmingly support for proposal number 2. Does this need to be confirmed on the list?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
It'll be confirmed based on the summary we provide to the mail list.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Martin had one more comment. Paramount would use SSH client.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, last one. How to address the semi-configurable aspects of the keychain module. This is currently a discussion on list from Martin's review. I presume that we'll continue the discussion on the list, but since it's an open issue currently, does anyone in the room like to discuss it, or perhaps Martin online would like to say something more about it now? No, okay, I didn't think so. So we'll continue to have a discussion on the list. Okay, next steps. Obviously, we want to close the open issues, potentially splitting the draft into many. It appears that's the approach we're taking. We would also update the call home reference implementation. If you recall, 2 years ago, I posted to GitHub a reference implementation during the hackathon. I started to update it, but I didn't complete the update. I do want to complete that update. Not only so we have more up-to-date reference implementation, but also because in the course of doing that update, I began to have a niggling feeling that maybe the way the server model configure. I mentioned the call home configuration reference implementation, but remember that reference implementation uses the server model as the means for how to configure the client and server aspects of that. So anyway, loading in the server model data may not actually be mappable to the implementation. So I just have a niggling feeling that there may be an issue, and I won't know for sure until I complete that reference implementation update. One concern about the reference implementation, it is just NetConf SSH and NetConf call home SSH. It's not trying to do TLS or RESTConf. So I'm not sure if this is a problem, if in fact we have to have a TLS or RESTconf implementation of server module prior to this draft being finalized. I know this is not an open issue, but it's on the slide if anyone wants to respond to that. But in the case where we are now, I'm sure we'll be discussing this again in IETF 96.
Thank you.
That's my last slide. Okay, great.
Zero touch.
Next presentation is on zero touch. This is 07, but just a couple days ago, yesterday I think, I posted 08. Still nothing's changed in a dramatic way, so this is still accurate. Recap, at IETF 94, large reviews were received from Anima draft editor Max Pritikin and from co-author Mikkel. Thank you. At the same time, sorry, Mikkel, am I misspelling it, mispronouncing it? Okay. At the same time, an operator requested for an ability for the bootstrapping data to optionally include a vendor specific script, which we'll talk about in a moment. There were a number of updates, so I'm not going to go through them one by one, but just to note that 3 of them we'll be discussing in the next 3 slides. So the first of these is bootstrapping off of DNS. We did add the ability to bootstrap off of DNS using DNS SD or service discovery. You can support either multicast or normal domain lookups. The data that's found from or retrieved from the DNS records can either be signed or unsigned data. However, there is returning signed data is limited due to size constraints and also multi-vendor applicability. So what I mean by that is the DNS packets, especially the text records, are very small in size. I don't think they can exceed 1,300 bytes, for instance. And if you like the certificate, an X509 certificate can be much larger than that. So the draft makes some efforts to do compression. There's a recommendation to use elliptical keys instead of RSA because the keys are much smaller. And also there's a recommendation for it to be gzip to further make the size smaller. And then the draft has mapping of the fields to DNS records. So specifically the DNS records address and port fields are mapped to DNS server records, and all the other data, meaning the signature, the owner certificate, the ownership voucher, are all mapped to DNS text records. The second update of note, provisional TLS connections. RESTconf requires TLS. However, when a device is provided unsigned redirect information, which means it cannot trust any trust anchor that it may be being provided, it has to blindly accept the TLS certificate that the RESTconf server is providing. This is known as a provisional TLS connection. So the solution the draft says is that it's okay for the device to blindly accept the TLS certificate, but when it does so, it must require that the bootstrapping data it finds there is signed, and it requires that the client does not provide any client authentication credentials, and it requires that the client does not send any notifications. So the idea being is you're connecting to an untrusted remote server, you don't want to give up any private information. Yes, it can be a source of data, just like a raw HTTP server, but you don't want to give up any secrets or identity. So that's the approach that the draft is taking. And the third point is the support for scripting. To support some additional pre-provisioning not covered by the configuration. So for instance, the installation of FMPM clients on the router. The snippet of the module, the tree diagram, we have the boot image and the configuration from before, and now there's a third top level thing called script. It is optional. It's currently listed as a string, but maybe binary would be a better thing. The intent is that it's a vendor specific format, so leave it to the vendors to decide if it's Perl or Python or an executable of some sort. The change to the bootstrap process, you see, 1 through 4. 3 is the new part. So as with 1, as before, the device will try to install the boot image if necessary. 2, it will commit the running the configuration to the running config. 3, if there's a script, then it would execute the script and process the exit status code with the standard out, standard error. The next slide goes over that detail. And then 4, it would send the final notification. So that's what the script support for scripts is about. Some more on supporting scripts. Again, it's a vendor-specific format. The script should be executed with root level permissions. The script must provide an exit status code as follows. 0 means there is no error and the processing can continue. If it's greater than 0, it means it was a soft failure, and so it was like a warning. And so from the script's perspective, it hasn't affected the manageability of the device, and so processing can continue. But if it's less than 0, it means the script has decided that it's a hard error, and you simply cannot recover from it. There's no way you can manage the device at that point, in which case the bootstrapping process would have to abort. And because there's no knowing how badly the script messed up your system, it actually means that the device would have to restart by re-imaging the device. Remember how the first step is to install the boot image? Well, it'd have to reinstall the boot image because we just don't know how badly it messed up. Okay, so that's scripts. Some open issues. Again, we'll go over these one by one. The first is ownership voucher. Should we formally define it? Currently, the ownership voucher is defined as being a vendor-specific format. Is simply an example in the appendix section of what one might look like. However, a normative definition would fix the DNS multi-vendor issue, which the draft discusses in detail, but I skipped over on the earlier slide. The issue, of course, is when you go to a DNS server and you're getting your DNS lease from the server, you would, if it's signed to data, you would need to get back the ownership voucher in order to validate the data. But if the ownership voucher is a vendor-specific format, then and it's a multi-vendor network, you would have to use option 60 in order for the client to specify which class of device it is, so the DNS server could return the right ownership format, ownership voucher format to that device. It gets kind of tricky. If we had a normative definition of it, it would resolve that and allow it to be to play better in a multi-vendor environment. Additionally, the Anima team expressed interest in referencing or using the ownership voucher. It would require a need for adding an additional fields of some kind to specify the kind of ownership verification. So currently, our notion is absolute. The manufacturer has absolute knowledge of who the owner of the device is. But in the Anima approach, it may not necessarily be absolute. It might just simply be that the awareness that the device has joined a domain has been logged by the manufacturer. So it's a slightly softer form of ownership verification. If we were to do this, then we should probably formally define the VRL, what I call VRL. It's kind of like a CRL, but it's a vendor-specific format, vendor revocation list format as well. So, any thoughts on this? Okay, I'll take it to the list and also try to solicit the Anima folks to engage in that conversation. The second point, how to commit the config, merge or replace. Currently, the text just says that the device commits the configuration without clarifying how. Should the device merge or replace the config? Some considerations. Merge, if we're merging, then existing factory default configuration cannot be removed, right? You just overwrite it at best, but you can't actually remove existing configuration with merge. If it's a replace, then it requires all the desired default configuration to be provided again. So some options are to hard code replace. It does seem to be the better of the two options. You could just hard code replace, but it always works, but will result in a large initial configuration file every time. We could use a top level flag and then let the deployments decide. So at a top level, just a single flag globally does the device merge or replace the configuration in. Third choice is to use something like edit configure yang patch to provide much granularity, but it's unclear to me if that much granularity is needed. Any thoughts on this?
Rick Taylor. I would go for option 3, which is the patch. Our existing non-NetConf solution, we're looking to move to NetConf rather than use proprietary, does a very similar thing with a patch. It works well for us, and we'd like to continue just moving from the initial config coming off the back end of the factory to auto config, just patch down the differences. Because these configs can be big, and a lot of it's fairly fixed. It's just that initial bootstrap, so patch seems much easier than replace. Yeah, you could put in a top-level flag to try and satisfy everyone. If you do, make sure patch is in the flag, please.
Okay, so maybe a fourth option, which is the top level flag, rather than just being an enum of 2 choices, replace and merge, would be also patch. Could be a third choice there.
That would work for us.
Okay, great. Any other comments? Okay, so we'll confirm that on the list. Thanks. Number 3 is how to calculate the signature over Yang data. The current text says that sorry for the eye chart here. Anyway, the current text says that the signature is over the data in whatever form it's provided in, whether it be XML or JSON. This works great for all sources of bootstrapping data, removable storage, DNS, DHCP responses, even Bootstrap servers when you're getting the data from the Bootstrap server. But when you are getting the data from the Bootstrap server, it would require that both the northbound application that's that's pushing the configuration into the Bootstrap server, as well as the device that's pulling the data from the Bootstrap server, are accessing the identical URLs, the redirect information or the Bootstrap information URLs. But this approach has issues. One, the server must not change its encoding in any way between the time the data was saved and the time the device retrieves the data. So even a single white space character, if the Bootstrap server were somehow upgraded and the RESTconf engine got changed, or upgrade, changed, and it emitted the data in a different way, it would cause the signature verification to fail. Second is that these 2 resources are both under a choice node, and the device doesn't know up front which will be present, because a Bootstrap server can either return redirect information or Bootstrap information. And so if we have, it would actually have to try both, just to figure out which one it might return. And sort of following on that point, it is desirable for the device to just fetch the single top-level device resource to get everything in one request. So otherwise it'd be 3 requests at a minimum to get all the data. So some options here: we could keep as is and force the device to try both URL resources and live with the potential that the encoding may change between the time the data was saved and when it's retrieved. 2, we could try to define a canonical format for XML and JSON encodings, though I'm not actually sure if this is even possible. 3, we could define an encoding independent signature algorithm. And this is sort of what I tried before, but the idea is that, imagine walking the data tree, and then for each value, you convert it into, say, a string, and then concatenate all the strings together and then do the signature over the string. So this would be independent if the data was provided in XML or JSON format, because the algorithm would work for all the different formats. But I believe this might be tricky to define and not easy to implement. And 4, we could encode both resources as having a top-level type string, right? So it's no longer, it is still gang modeled data, but from the RESTconf API perspective, it's just a blob. It's just a string. And that sort of frees us up of all the issues of dealing with the different encoding problems. And also, it allows us to go back to the device being able to pull just a single top-level resource. Any thoughts on this one?
Jeff Haas, as far as like number 3, defining encoding independent signature algorithm goes, that's effectively where a lot of the crypto type stuff ends up taking us, like the PKCS number 9 encoding thing that's very popular in IETF requires you to canonicalize in this very specific BER format in ASN. And that's specifically because ASN is flexible enough that if you allow it to be flexible, you can't guarantee what the signature looks like implementation to implementation. You have the same problem for a lot of the stuff here. Like one example might be if you're writing your config in UTF-8 and you happen to be able to get the same encoding out of a different encoding, like say ASCII, it's not exactly guaranteed to be the same thing depending on exactly what the inputs are. So canonicalization, I think, is going to be a requirement. I think that unfortunately in the formats we have available, it's very tricky.
So your recommendation was which?
We should canonicalize in some fashion.
Number 2?
Correct.
So one of the issues with number 2, you can imagine the device pulling the top level device resource, right? And the way it works is let's say XML, and the namespace would be on the
Exactly.
The namespace at the XMLNS attribute would be on the top level device element, but then you would want to convert it into, well, I really want to apply it to the, let's say, redirect information. So somehow the client or the device would have to, have read in that top level data structure and then be able to calculate what the structure would have been, the thing that got signed.
I am totally agreeing with you.
And there's other issues as well. For instance, XML and JSON, there's no guaranteed ordering, right? So with Yang encoded data, if you have a container with a number of leaves or sub-elements, it's actually valid. They could show up in any order. So which order was it that they were in at the time that they were assigned?
Let's continue with this on the mail list. I assume we cannot finalize the discussion here.
Can I ask a question for the chairs? Can we maximize the screen? Because the font is really small at the back of the room. Or well, have you got a presentation mode or something so we can get it just a little bit bigger?
Click on the plus sign somewhere.
Okay.
It's even better.
Okay. So it's number 4, the 4th open issue. Oh, I'm sorry. We're still playing with the screen.
Full screen mode. It's gone.
Okay, there we go. So Michael Richardson provided an on-list review, a suggestion to regarding the removable storage format. The current text says details such as the format of the file system and the naming of files are left to the device's manufacturer to define. His recommendation was that we actually define these formats. I see some heads shaking. Anybody want to come to the mic?
Jeff Haas, storage formats have changed immensely over the last 20 years. These models are going to be around longer than that. Fixing them is going to be a generally bad idea. What might make sense is to have a general registry that can be extended to choose some normative ones from, but not to fix it to a set.
So let's just think about what would be the motivation for having a defined format. It would allow a network management application that's managing multiple vendor gear to be able to generate like a USB stick in a consistent manner to plug into any kind of device. That's, I guess, the benefit that we would have from doing this.
You want to go first? Okay, so MCR, I guess, that Michael Richardson, I guess, says no, not that we define them, but that we reference some specification from elsewhere so that people aren't clueless.
Okay, I think that was maybe somewhat of what Jeff was saying as well.
Rick Taylor, I'm now confused. It sounds an awful lot like you're now trying to define Pixie boot at this point. You're trying to bring up the whole installation of your device rather than bootstrapping your initial config off something which has got some firmware boot. Is this maybe my misunderstanding of what you're trying to achieve here?
Well, it is bootstrapping the device, indeed. It installs the boot image, it installs the initial configuration, it may execute an initial script, and to the extent, whatever is necessary in order for the device to be ready to be managed and connect to its network management system. The big difference here before with other prior work, is that this is secure. This is secure zero touch. It's not, you're not just going to the local TFTP server and downloading your initial configuration.
Understood. I'm not sure I'd quite understood how deep down you were going in terms of bringing. From my mind, it was you're bringing down the configuration, so you're moving from some end-of-line factory configuration that you've got on your device to something which gets put on before it goes in the cardboard box or goes out to the customer site that gets brought up at that point. I didn't realize you were coming down as far as, well, let's flash out our SD-RAM and let's start building UBFS and all this kind of stuff. But that's fine. I mean, if that might be my understanding. I just think it might be going a little bit too far. How far is this scoped? Where does Bootstrap end and become a manufacturing issue?
Not sure if I fully understand. Again, the device is shipped from manufacturing with an initial boot image and an initial configuration. The idea is to magically allow the device that's bootstrapping in the wild to discover some information that its rightful owner has, placed it, and there's strategies for how ownership is verified, and then once it gets that rightful the verification, then it can install what's apparently deployment-specific Bootstrap image, which one is supposed to be running in a deployment-specific configuration. The configuration here is just any normal configuration, NetConf, RESTConf configuration. It could be anything, right? It could be the full config of the device, it could be tens of megabytes in size.
Yeah.
But it really just has, by definition, for what this working group cares about, it just needs to be the minimal to allow the device to have connectivity to its network management application system, which would be, for instance.
Let's move on. We can
Yeah,
continue
that's fine,
this
that's
discussion.
fine. I just wanted a definition of anything, and it sounds like it is
so
anything.
Such basics can be also discussed offline.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, so we'll take this one to the list as well. Thank you. Final stretch.
Please.
Okay, so in my opinion, this draft is nearly done. Operational experience shows this to be true. It's currently deployed in its earlier form at several locations. In my opinion, we only need to address these open issues just discussed, and then we're done. I would like to see more complete reviews, to be sure. Max and Michael provided excellent reviews, and Sean as well. Sorry, that was the other guy. But more eyes on this, the better. I think if we address the open issues and then do a last call, that could be the vehicle by which we solicit these additional, complete reviews, and then we can decide the next step after that.
Let's do so. The open issues should be discussed on the main list. But in case you don't get any comment, please propose a way forward and ask whether there is an objection to do so.
Right. So my hope is actually to have the last call in about a month's time, depending on how complex these open issues are. But and then in 96, we're not really having to discuss this draft anymore.
Yeah, last call is necessary to force people to review. Okay,
great.
thanks.
Thank you.
Let's go further. So,
This is Eric again, speaking in behalf of Alberto, who did the first main draft with support of Alex, Ambika, and Enar again. This work is new since the last IETF, and it was driven by charter changes asking us to look not just at Yang push, but also at notifications. And so we put together a draft aimed at trying to look what it would mean to take a look at 5277, put a Yang model on it, and support some of the other stuff as required by the charter. Next slide. Oh, yeah, thanks, Eric. So what is the motivation for this draft? As we just talked about, we want to convert the model for 5277 into Yang and also add with the model some of the things that are in the other draft, which include the ability to delete subscriptions, modify multiple subscriptions on a session, and again, backwards compatibility with 5277, which is key. These are basics that you want to have with the subscription model and not just for Yang push. So the functionality proposed, is the functionality from RFC 5277, create, filter, replay, stream discovery, interleaving, that kind of stuff is there. In terms of new features, again, as we mentioned before, establish subscription, negotiate a subscription, so you can say, no, I don't want to have that subscription, modify, delete. I mean, these are the things that we talked about prior when we were talking about Yang Push. And also has some optional features too, which include static subscriptions, which some people might want, some people might not want, and also different encodings. You know, do you want to do more than just, you know, NetConf? Do you want to do XML? Oh, sorry, do you want to do JSON? Do you want to do GPB? Do you want to do HTTP? You know, there should be, again, variability in what you'd want to have in your transports. So, as mentioned before, reuse the subscription control paradigm from Yang Push to do this. And again, we have the ability to do negotiation. We have the ability in there to do static subscriptions, suspension and termination. Of course, you can't actually terminate a pre-configured subscription because it's going to stay after reboot, so you only can suspend those. And again, support for multiple encodings is also part of the model here. Again, going back to the wonderfully complex table, this just shows on the left-hand side event notifications on 1.1 matching to the 5277 set of capabilities, and the 1.0 on the left showing the existing capabilities, and 1.1 on the right showing those enhanced capabilities that we discussed before, with the transports, you know, perhaps being bound or not bound based on the discussion we're going to have later. Now, this is a work in progress. We just got our first draft out. We have invited the authors, as I mentioned before, for the original 5277 in. There is someone else in this room is also considering becoming a draft author. We're trying to be as inclusive as possible to make sure a broad set of people will be contributing to this work. And other things we're going to do with work in progress, we have to figure out all the error types that might be needed. We have to add workflows and additional examples. We have to do streams config, true or false. Question, Andy?
Yeah, one thing we had talked about, I'm not sure I saw on your slide, was the ability to do like next generation filters. The kind of filters we have are brute force. They're prone to error. They're just, I mean, they're okay, but it's really not as well as we could do. So I was just throwing that out there. I'm not going to go into details now, but is there anyone else in the room think that filters needs work?
I think that exact same question, it was Jeff, but we had the exact same question before when somebody said, do we want the range filters? It was Kent who said, I want range filters and standard deviation filters. That might be interesting. So we're all finding that there's got to be a base set and then the ability to probably add additional ones. And that's fun but interesting work. I'll put it that way.
Well, another dimension of complexity is maybe the notion of a template for a filter, and then site-specific and device-specific variables that plug into the filter, rather than generating raw, you know, the raw XML or XPath kind of filters. That requires more explanation on the mailing list, but
yeah, I'd love to go with this on the mailing list. One thing we did do, for those of you who read the model, is we have actually a case where you have case of XPath, case of 6241 filter, for the very reason that we think that filters will become a vendor differentiator at some point, as well as something we can standardize on later if people want to add new filters to the overall set that we want to support as a full community.
Rick Taylor, I'm repeating myself again. We're doing some of the work we're doing within delay tolerant networking to do with filtering is we're starting to define a virtualized, simple, secure stack machine with operators and controllable variables and trying to build an execution model for this kind of stuff. It might be a little too specialist for what you're looking at, but we've put a fair amount of work into that, and we're very happy to share any of the work we're doing there with you guys.
Awesome. To kind of repeat one thing from before for everybody, filters is scary. I mean, we decided not to pick up new types, and so we just took the existing ones because of the wonderful rat holes they provide for new functionality. So while we could have gone ahead and done a whole lot of presentations on possible filter types, we found that we wouldn't get any other work done. I think we talked work in progress. So one of the original questions on the mailing list is how do we get the other authors involved? We want more authors. It was just that we learned this and we wanted to get a draft out in time for discussion here. And so we've engaged the other authors. There are definitely members who can be part of it. And we want anybody who also has big contributions to come with us because this should be a community effort. Hector Trevino has already said yes to being a member. He was one of the original 5277 authors. Yeah.
Can you report shortly from the ongoing discussion with Sharon on the static subscriptions?
Sure. So for everybody who didn't see the mail list, Sharon pointed out that static subscriptions can be more complex, and that's true. Like I mentioned in the Yang push model, you have to configure the receivers. The other thing is with static subscriptions, you're going to have the origination coming from the source of the data rather than the target. These are why we have to think about things like call home. These are why we have to think about where the servers sit. We have thought through these issues in terms of Yang push, but we got to get a larger set of understanding across the different types of transport of what that actually means. And we will get Sharon involved as much as she wants.
Yeah, as a recommendation, it is indeed interesting to keep the compatibility with the current RFC and avoid any issues for compatibility, but everything on top of it is welcome.
All right, excellent. Yes, we definitely have a 1.0 completely, fully backwards compatible version with, if you have the features and capabilities of the 1.1 version, then it assumes with those capabilities that you're able to do some of these extra stuff. So we have separated in the draft the feature capabilities based on the type that can be negotiated.
Mehmet, as one last point, I mean, you were saying you invited Sharon and Hector, I assume.
Yes.
Even if they don't have much time, it is, I think, important to have them as co-author, so to be able to ensure the backwards compatibility.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes we new authors have to learn protocol and etiquette, and this is a case of that. All right, so I think I'm almost at the end. Thank you.
So one procedural question is this 5277 biz completely or 5277 biz plus other work?
Well, I mean, I have to learn the terminology used for biz plus other work. We think that we added on functions that are in the charter for new subscription types, new transports. When does a biz become new? I don't know. You guys tell me. I don't know. I know what I want. I don't know what to call it.
If we keep the existing functionality, it should be possible to arrange the new RFC as a replacement or as a superset of the existing one.
And that's what we've been assuming. But again, I'm trying to learn the terminology as we go. We think it's there, but again, I'm happy to be educated otherwise.
I mean, this topic is in any case a charter topic. Mm-hmm. Even if we cannot adopt it today as it is, I don't know whether this is necessary to push right now at this moment. It will be adopted at some point in any case. It is a charter topic.
Yeah. In any case, I didn't come saying we should, Alberto and everybody else didn't come saying we should adopt today. One of the big reasons is, again, we want to get the main authors on. We want to get a chance for some of the other people in this room who are going to have good stuff to go ahead and do it.
I mean, we don't need to adopt it immediately during a physical meeting. Let's continue the discussion with the original authors of 5277 and come to an agreement that this is the way to go. Unfortunately, Sharon is even not available on Meet Echo. So let's do it in a few weeks' time. We can ask for adoption on the mail list.
That would be great. One last question. I want to see if people care. We haven't asked that question yet of the draft. Yes, it's on the charter. I want to see if people read this or think the notifications in general are of interest. I think yes, but I'd love hands if you guys can do that.
Okay. All right. Can we have a show of hands of how many people have actually read the draft? Okay. A few hands. All right. On the question of interest, how many people feel that they have an inherent interest? Okay, majority of the room.
A lot of people. All right. Well, thanks. Oh, we got a question.
Yeah, I'm Guan Yingzheng from Huawei. We already supported modify subscription now.
Okay.
And I think a little difference with your draft the mechanism. Maybe we can discuss in the mail list or after meeting.
That'd be great.
Detail. Okay.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Next is Sue.
So Jeff, get ready for the mic. Uh-oh, this should come out because I'm small.
Who is the blue sheet? Please
Blue sheets?
continue to giving around for new people.
Okay. Okay, this is the R2S update. Jeff and I are here and we're trying to give you an update. The good news is you will shortly receive on the mail list, we hope 1 to 2 weeks after we clean up IETF comments, the R2S requirements and protocol strawman, we hope. Okay, this discussion will help format, determine if we need to make additional changes. Please go ahead. Oh, what? I am in control. Okay, so R2S, just as information, we've gotten our architecture and problem statement, our requirements, some of which you've already implemented in the pub sub. We have protocol security. In going through, as the chair, one of the things I've learned from the NetConf chairs is to go through and check everything very carefully against the use case and then very carefully go see if there's any holes left. So in the review post 94, I found that we didn't really have our data flow requirements down. So I presented this time for people's input some additional data flow requirements to see if they were really useful, and we presented ephemeral protocol strawman, and I will go through both. Our next steps are to adopt the few requirements we have. Most people who were implementing NetConf R2S gave us some of those, and to adopt the protocol strawman, bundle them all up and send them to NetConf for final determining what you do to change the NetConf protocol. By the way, R2S, in case you've been not aware for some reason, is a reuse protocol. We have elected other R2F IETF protocols. We are suggesting changes. You're in the midst of one of them with the pub sub stuff, and we are trying to give you the rest. So just a short note. We've got one we need to talk on the list. A sub-implementer suggested that on validation of items written to a Yang model, that they would like to have something different than fully validated. And at this point, Andy's suggestion of fully validated is the only one with someone standing up and raising their hand and giving us details. We'll give a couple calls to the people who had asked about minimum and no referential, which is no must, no reference checks on the list. And if we don't hear anything, we'll just go with the NetConf full validation. Just as you've shown, you have XML and JSON, and you use multiple transports. And we would like it selectable. I need to nail down with people whether it's in Yang or by the user, but I believe you do both in this case. Meaning, if you have NetConf, what can you select? If you have RESTConf, what can you select? So that's one more piece that we have to tie down. The last one is we should have resource constraints in case R2S, some of its actions might be overflown, and that should include as part of the OEM action. Go ahead, Jason.
Jason Stern. Yeah, I remember seeing requirement 6 in I2RS, and since then I've just had a basic question. It seemed to, I can understand the concept of it specifying priority, but it also, the slide before hinted at things like CPU resources and memory.
So the idea is if you're doing a whole lot of updates, you might want to say, if I'm going to do a whole lot of RIB updates, I might want to set a memory limit. And that was coming in from Dan Bovanovich.
So,
So let's say you had a very large topology update or some sort of topology topology database pull. You might want to be able to specify how much bandwidth that particular thing would have, meaning bandwidth on the data, bandwidth on the memory.
I guess is probably something that needs to be discussed in more detail on the list, but it strikes me as difficult to imagine specifying any sort of absolute numbers around memory.
No,
or
it's not
CPU cycle. Priority, relative priority of things I can kind of see, but things like specifying memory or bandwidth or CPU cycles.
Jason.
Yeah. In any sort of absolute way.
The idea is to set just like you might set a maximum packet rate. This is the maximum bandwidth rate that it has. Jeff, did you have any additional comments?
Just the clarification for Jason as an example. So in a telemetry style application, it's the push type stuff that we've been discussing. Eventually you are going to exceed the ability to queue up stuff in the face of some sort of transport back pressure. This is an example of, hey, we want to allow the user to wrench back the amount of notifications that might be being generated in a specific time interval. So
more questions, Jason?
So I guess those kind of concepts seem reasonable. It's when you start talking about if we start talking about absolute numbers of bandwidth or memory, that seems tricky because all implementations are going to use different bandwidth depending on internal encoding, and memory will be different depending on how the structures are stored, etc.
So, go ahead.
So I would say that if we're perhaps being imprecise here, that we want to actually say that there's some sort of resource considerations being given and allow for that. But obviously what those things are will be tricky. In this document, we're attempting to say there are going to be constraints. Here's examples of some of those things.
So for the format,
are there more? Go ahead.
So for the format, could you start with just using the default option for NetConf as XML and JSON for RESTConf?
Yes, that was the point. I didn't really think there was anything to change in that. I think that everyone, Jeff, I didn't think we had anything other than the standard in item 2.3/9. I didn't think we had anything additional to what's actually being defined. Did I miss?
So the discussion that we've had, Ms. Jeff Oz again, the discussion we had is that we will definitely require a mandatory to implement, which is very likely going to be the standard, NetConf, RESTConf with XML and or JSON, depending on the format. But very similar to the push discussion, there are going to be cases where we want to provide the ability to do different transports or different formats for specific applications. For example, telemetry applications may be configured by, for example, the push mechanism, and the expected output may be gRPC protobufs. So this requirement is
but for V1, I didn't see that they pushed that.
Correct. The goal again is we must have a mandatory to implement because we must have a place for all of us to start. But as you're seeing, even with the push work, which is its way, I think, somewhat in from I2RS, you're seeing sort of the first footprints of this. The requirement is here to make sure that we say this is important. We want to have the flexibility. We must start with the mandatory to implement, but we want to leave the flexibility for a later date.
But for the first one, we didn't really have anybody saying they were ready. I'm trying to get back to your point. By the way, I wish they could turn down the back stuff, but I just hear it instead of Jeff. Okay. Questions on the requirements. In other words, I don't think, other than the first requirement, there is anything really startling. And that I have to tie down. Right now, Andy, I didn't have anybody that even stood up and said anything other than full on Tuesday. I mean, I haven't had anybody talk to me in the hall that says anything else. So we'll see. I'm going to give a call one more time, and then I think we're pretty wrapped on that, and we'll send you that. I just had implementers who said they absolutely had to do it when we started this, but they've gone silent. So if you go silent, life happens. Okay. And the stuff in the back, IP fix possible in V2. Benoit, people thought it was a good idea. Some people gave example, but if they aren't ready to come up with a proposal, I said, it's V2. You can come to V2 in a couple months, but I'm trying to be very tight. That's what you guys told me to do. Okay. So, my fine coach here. Okay. Go ahead. Just go ahead and, oh, I've got it. Fine. Hello. You know, it's Thursday, isn't it? Okay, if we need, I thought I was going to have 5 minutes. If I get through the rest of this and there's no discussion, we won't have an IR2S meeting, but we scheduled a second meeting in case people want to talk. If you think you want to talk and we run out of time, catch me at the end and we've still got the meeting room. Okay. And in case we need to have it, I've scheduled a couple, I've set aside a couple dates for virtual interims. I'm just trying to allow feedback. Okay, the data models are pretty stable, and we hope to implement and put the implementations that we do in open source. Okay, now this I thought helped us go through a lot of the protocol. This is off of something we were almost there with IETF 95, but it's a plan for 96. This should have a, nope, yes it does. Okay, so this is what we sort of got done, which I was amazed. We loaded Yang CLI Pro from HumanWorks. We were able to configure and load CompD from, did I get the name right? People from, pardon? TailF, yeah. Is that the TailF one? I didn't figure. Pardon? Yeah, it's the company kind is right here. I just thought suddenly, okay, and we had them at least hello and say something. Gang CLI Pro seemed to load the IR2S model. I don't know if it checked for the ephemeral, but because we didn't get all the way to talking CompD and doing something. But this open source is tremendously forward from the last time we were working, and those we were able to just download from the web during the hackathon. Then right here is the part that I'd like to sort of describe to you. You know, if you were working Zebra and Zebra had a configuration, it could run a configuration into the general Zebra through CompD. It could also run through a specific thing with an IR2S agent. It could run into and just add the table. And there's a feature inside of the Quagga protocol code that just adds and deletes routes. Pretty easy to make that I2RS and call it a IR2S protocol instead of BGP or OSPF. So that's the basic sort of concept of IR2S in the code. The other thing is, aside of Quagga for next time, we'll try to do the same thing with the Linux IP table, and that looks pretty much like the IR2S filter-based RIB. Questions? Nope, just looking. Okay. So that's pretty much the two RIB models, the IR2S RIB and the IR2S filter-based RIB, and the topology is pretty well implemented for layer 2 and layer 3, right, Eric? Yep. So you have our models done. Let's see. He showed you this one, and I should have showed you this for what we did. This was our actual demo. And again, that took us, we spent more time setting up the environment for a virtual net than actually downloading the code. I downloaded the code for Yang CLI Pro minutes, conferencing minutes, compile, start putting stuff together. If you know Quagga, if I'd had another 5 or 6 hours and started on Saturday, it shouldn't have been too much. So these things should hopefully build together fairly quickly. Okay. I guess I didn't, go ahead. Okay. I'm done unless you want me to go into the protocol details, in which case I'll have to pull another slide set. Okay, so I'm done. Any questions about?
People interested should also attend the I2RS session.
Or just meet me in the back of the room and tell me you're interested, and we'll sit and talk through the slides together.
Yeah, I mean, people will attend, I assume, like myself. So next is RESTConf push. How is actually the impression of the people on the title of the draft? I heard at least one comment saying it is not Yang push, it is NetConf push, right? Kent, can you explain what you were proposing?
Yes, hi, Kent, this is Kent. The Yang push that's not the right, that's a misnomer, right? I mean, if we have RESTConf push, then the similar NetConf draft should be called NetConf push.
So the proposal is to delete Yang and keep NetConf push and RESTConf push.
Well, actually, we were talking earlier about maybe a third draft, right? The controlled draft. So maybe that would be, I don't know what we would call that one, but NetConf push would be for the NetConf transport, and RESTConf push would be for the RESTConf transport.
I would totally agree with that. That would be fine. The names don't matter. I was just, at the time when we first came up with the names, we had matched the transports and the encodings before, transports and the Yang subscription model before. It's easier to name it now that they're going to be separated.
And we may not even just call it RESTConf push, but RESTConf push transport.
Yes.
Add the word transport to it. And,
absolutely. Again, that's easy.
And it could be Yang push model to, yeah.
I think we got our names.
Sounds
good.
perfect.
All right, so this is not a long one, but hopefully we can have some discussion more afterwards. Again, I'm presenting on behalf of Alex and Ambika and Alberto and Inar. Obviously, there's a trend going here. Once again, the list of tables, but in terms of what we're addressing, we're just addressing the RESTConf and HTTP transport of these new subscriptions that we talked about. How do you take the subscription model and bind it down into a new transport? This particular draft does HTTP, HTTP2, and RESTConf. And all the rest of the stuff, again, is split across the other drafts. Now, there are 3 models that are addressed in this. On the left-hand side, there's a dynamic RESTConf model where you have a subscription going down through a RESTConf client up to a RESTConf server, where you have a request for a subscription to be made. You can do your negotiation. If you negotiate the subscription, then the subscription's created and you start doing push over the RESTConf because you've established the transport between the two. Second one is the locally configured one, and that is where you statically configure a session on a publisher, and you go ahead and you have to establish a connection, a transport connection across. Could you use RESTConf? Yes, but for pushes, it doesn't buy you a whole lot to add information above and beyond here's the subscription ID. So the question of using RESTConf is viable, but there's not a whole lot of value there. So having a little receiver on the top end that is able to take the push and make sure it goes to the right applications is a simpler way of doing the push for static. Now, because of IoT and other reasons, we've had some belief that separating the subscriber and the receiver is interesting. You might have a management plane in which the subscriber and the receiver kind of decide what they care about, but you don't want to actually involve the receiver in the dynamic signaling. Why? The receiver might be a really dumb box that doesn't have the ability to signal, or you might have it in a non-trusted environment, or a whole bunch of things. And therefore, the ability to have somebody else do proxy subscription on your behalf makes a lot of sense for some models, for security models, for a whole bunch of reasons. So the idea of having a separate subscriber from a receiver is important. There are things that you have to handle there. For example, making sure that you don't open up a DDoS vector where somebody goes ahead and subscribes to the Library of Congress and push it continually to a receiver. So you've got to make sure that you have the ability to allow people to say I want in or not for any push subscriptions. So those are really the three models that are addressed in the draft. Updates. Well, most of it was we ripped out the stuff that was in there from subscriptions, Yang subscriptions from the draft that we had before, and we took that subscription stuff like priority and QoS and the rest of it, and we moved it over into the main Yang subscription model. And so that's pretty much what happened. We moved over the state machine. Otherwise, what we're left with is just the RESTconf transport part of it. And the HTTP2.
Is that the right draft name? It's not IETF. Is it working group?
That was a bad paste on my part. Yeah, that should have been. It should have been without the RESTconf. I just pasted incorrectly. So that word netconf, a RESTconf shouldn't have been on that. And next steps. Well, really the question is new transports. If we're talking about transports for subscriptions, do we want to have it for events and for Yang push? I think probably yes. There's all sorts of benefits you get by having a transport for subscriptions over that. And I'll give you a couple examples. The DTN example that was brought up before. The DTN example would be what happens if you have a box go down and that you have a whole bunch of notifications and a whole bunch of subscriptions for push queued up. Which one gets sent first? Did I name it wrong, paste on the draft?
Yeah, I'm sorry again. It wasn't so much the fact that you put NetConf in the name, it was that you had IETF in the name. It's not a working group adoption.
No, it's not. That's just me being an idiot.
The actual draft name is draft void RESTconf.
Yes, that is the proper name, and I can't explain it other than I can't type. Or maybe it was wishful thinking, I don't know. It certainly wasn't intentional. So the DTN example is if you have multiple subscriptions, how do you know what to push first over any transport, whether it's NetConf or GPB or whatever? So I think having, again, a common transport across it would make sense. So if there's interest, then we can make sure that we get the right requirements with the RFC 5277 biz draft. If there isn't really interest, I still think it's valuable to separate the transport from itself. And, the last thing I want to do here is, despite the awful name that I apparently gave the document, gauge the interest in pursuit and adoption of this type of stuff. Andy?
Andy Bierman, yeah, if you go back to your slide with the multiple, the separate subscriber, this is really interesting to me. I would really like us to get to a point where we can create modular standards, meaning, well, there's three parts. There's the data, which is syntax and semantics. Then there's the interaction model. How does the protocol actually run back and forth? And then there's the transport and the plumbing. And there's no reason why I can't conform to one part and do experimental stuff on the other. Okay, I'm going to run this stuff over CoAP and Seaborn. It's going to run 50 to 100 times faster than your NetConf. Okay, so I would just want to do that. I don't want to be stopped from doing that. And other people want to do stuff like that too with other transports. So, it would be really useful to be able to conform to one part of it and not have the whole thing blow up because just one little piece of it has been replaced.
I'm in violent agreement with that. There's another person in the room who's talked about IPFix as a transport, and that is useful in case you want some binary data and some efficiency. Why not allow another IPFix transport? I think that would make a lot of sense. There might be non-standard transports, GPB. How do we do the bindings? At least we have the separations here to allow the linkage to be as clean as possible.
Rick Taylor, Airbus. Talking about non-standard and proprietary transports, but trying to maintain that's that's us. I mean, we run proprietary transports around airframes and spacecraft and stuff, but we still want to reuse as much of this proper peer-reviewed open standard stuff. So, following on from the previous statement, yeah, let's try and keep the specs modular so that we can pick what works best for our specific environments.
I'm hearing agreement on breaking it up into transport, and I don't know, we can take it to the list. Maybe I've jinxed myself unintentionally by naming it wrong, but I mean, I'm hearing people say that transport of this type is something that's worth taking as a working group item. I mean, I want to have a vote, but it seems like people want this.
This is Mehmet Ersoy. There is interest. The topic is, as far as I know, chartered. The charter text does not make any difference between netconf yank push or resconf yank. The topic as such is chartered.
Yeah.
So we should probably discuss how many drafts we need, or how the drafts are organized before adopting anything. We need to see clearly what is where and what kind of drafts we are going to develop.
I'll give you my proposal.
What I understood so far, is it correct? I have to admit, I am a bit confused right now. Is it correct that resconf yank push, what you are presenting here, is mainly the transport? For
Only
resconf?
the transport.
Yeah. And the related yank push mechanism is already in netconf yank push described.
We moved everything out of the resconf yang push into the base yang push for the reason that the working group provided us last
for
time.
netconf yang push, you still need a separate transport draft.
We'll still need netconf, correct?
Yes. So at the end, I count now 3 drafts. Is this correct?
Well, actually, I will say that we're counting 4
If you want to
drafts.
if you want to
So
split up
you
the
need to
subscription,
tell me what is the 4th one.
the bids, the 5277 bids.
Yeah. Okay. This is. Yeah. Okay. This is
So-
chartered as another item.
Yes, let me point. Sorry. But basically, that's the whole point of this slide. Is
Yeah,
to-
I understand there are 4 drafts to focus on. This is
that seems the natural breakdown to me. Again, the authors that are in there so far.
So let's have a few comments on this, whether people are agreeing with the 4 drafts as an organization of the drafts we are going to develop, or any other opinions. Let's see how the comments are.
Again, we'll break this up however people want, but this makes sense to us.
So Tim Carey, Nokia. So, we've gone through this before in other standards organizations, right? When we were implementing a new management protocol, in fact. And what we realize is the same thing that you're coming to the realization now, that it makes a clear delineation of separating the protocol aspects from the encoding aspects from the transport aspects. So I think instead of maybe what you should decide is how you want to, in general, layer your protocols and have then drafts that are respective to those particular layers. So I think maybe you might want to take the list. It says, okay, let's just talk about in general what are the layers we want to break this thing down to, and then apply the push to that layering mechanism. And that way you can have a clear you can clearly distinguish then how many drafts. There very well can end up being 4 drafts or 3 drafts, right? When you look at those layerings, but at least you got that idea, that framework in place first, right? And then you can apply these drafts to that framework of how you want to typically break things up. It might be 3 or it might be 4 layers. I don't know what the answer is, but certainly have that question first answered, and then you can apply it to that new framework.
I again have no problem with that. We can put out our proposal, get people responding. I'd love to get more feedback now, but it just makes it easier. Even just the naming, Ken was putting out, just getting the naming right is easier when you have an idea of what discrete elements you're trying to do.
Mehmet, as one last question, maybe you can clarify it. I mean, to me, the picture I see right now is kind of misleading. Why do I need netconf if I choose resconf to use as transfer? I mean, this is kind of misleading on the picture.
Yeah, I kind of tried to have the transports be independent Yeah, yeah. Do I have a pointer on this thing? There we go. There we go. No. Didn't work. No pointer. Anyway, what we decided in the first Yang push one was to take the netconf here and split it out. So that was why before it was showing is in the blob, but we decided to pull it out of the blob, and that should address your issue. Any other comments? I mean, I'd love to get, again, feedback if people, take it to the list, but does 4 sound like a generally reasonable approach? And then we can get, does anybody have anything else that they would like to float as a possibility?
We should ask for show hands,
Yeah.
Basic interest to work on 4 drafts as listed. I mean, event notifications, the Yang push mechanism in general, netconf transport and RESTconf transport.
Okay, so what we seem to all agree on is, I think the way Andy defined it is along some of those boundaries. So you have 2 drafts, one for each one of the transports, and then you have the encoding, and the final piece is the mechanism of how it works. So along those lines, along those 4 drafts, how many people feel that that is a reasonable set of drafts that we should work towards? A show of hands, please. Anyone disagrees? All right. There seems to be general consensus on it.
Well, thanks.
As I said earlier, the adoption should be done in a few weeks on the mail list after we clarify together with Sharon and Hector how they see and whether they co-author. I think they should. So we will do then on the mail list.
All right. So at this point, we are pretty much done with whatever items were in the agenda. Unless Mammoth has something.
One other point is you said at the beginning, Eric, we indeed need additional co-authors from other companies. This is, for myself, an essential point because as of today, it is valuable. I appreciate many Cisco people are working on it and contributing, but we need also other people as a, how should I say it, counterbalance. It is indeed important that other people show up and co-author and contribute.
I violently agree. There's a couple people in this room who are considering, who are other co-balancing vendors, which would be great. There's somebody else who brought up a great point earlier. Where is he from Huawei? There you are. I would love to have additional help too. So we would definitely invite other people to be authors on this.
Yeah, not only occasionally. I mean, the coaches might ask by name to join the group. I would like to see Juniper, for example, Huawei, etc. So please join the authors team.
Okay. Any other points of discussion? All right. If not, this meeting is concluded. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. The session is closed.